The 1960s started off looking pretty hopeful. John F. Kennedy had just been elected the President of the United States, a young, gifted, articulate, handsome man. The country was expecting the 60s to be really wonderful, but that dream quickly came to a screeching halt because in November of 1963, in Dallas, Texas, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. It wasn't just John F. Kennedy that died. Hope died in America. Hope was buried with him. It didn't take long until there was an escalation of anger and violence and bitterness that was growing and growing and growing and growing in our country. It expressed itself in a diversity of ways. There were campus riots all over the United States as college students rioted and protested on their campuses. It spilled over into the streets, and there were riots across America in the streets. There was civil unrest. There was a desire for social reform, for social revolution. Women's rights were on the docket. Racism was on the docket. Young people were angry about the Vietnam War, a war that seemed senseless to that generation, a war that seemed as if it would never end. It wasn't just John F. Kennedy that was assassinated, also Martin Luther King, a hero of that decade, one that tried to encourage peaceful protests. He was also assassinated. That same year, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And as the years grew, a generation grew more angry, more disillusioned, more bitter about what they saw going on in America. I guess the Time magazine really said it all. In April of 1966, the cover of the Time magazine read, "Is God dead?" And that's exactly what America felt like, at least America's youth. Because if God was alive, if he was up there, why wasn't he doing something? Why wasn't he stopping the chaos? Why wasn't he stopping the anger in America? Where was God? And so the cry of the nation was, "Is God dead?" By 1967, a generation descended on San Francisco for what was called the Summer of Love. It was an experiment to see if young people converged on one place in America and spent a summer seeking love, peace and happiness, maybe they'd find it. It was a summer of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Wild music defined that generation. They had the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, Pink Floyd. I think that the Rolling Stones came out with a song that said it well, "Can't Get No Satisfaction." That was the 60s, a generation that couldn't get any satisfaction, no matter how hard they tried, no matter what they experimented with, no matter what they did, they couldn't get no satisfaction. The Beatles also had a hit song out called "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And I assure you that what happened in San Francisco in the Summer of Love went way beyond hand-holding. Sex was wild, but no matter what they did, it left them empty. And that's when God showed up. When a generation was desperate, when a generation had tried everything there was to try, God showed up with some Christian adults that moved into San Francisco. They moved in 1 block from Haight-Ashbury, which was the center of the Summer of Love, and they called the home that they established the living room, because they just wanted young people to come and hang out and talk about what they were going through and what they were searching for. And young people would come by the droves and sit in the living room and talk about Jesus. And it was that summer that something new started. It wasn't a decade of violence. It began a decade of finding Jesus. It was called the Jesus People movement, because literally young people were encountering Jesus and falling in love with him and opening Bibles that they had never opened before and learning about who this Jesus was. They were baptized in the Pacific Ocean. They were baptized in swimming pools. It exploded over the whole West Coast. Really kind of the epicenter wasn't really San Francisco, it really went down to LA. There was a pastor named Chuck Smith with Calvary Chapels that was very involved. And so he was having many, many baptisms in the Pacific Ocean. And so then it spread all the way up the West Coast. It began to spread across the United States, and young people were largely meeting, not in like Starbucks or Caribou, but in what they called coffee houses or coffee shops. It was literally places where young people would gather to talk about Jesus. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What does it mean to be in love with Jesus? They were called the Jesus Freaks. They too made the cover of Time magazine, Life magazine. Media was telling the story of young people meeting Jesus all over the United States. The climax of the Jesus People movement was in about 1972. There was a very special event held in Dallas, Texas called Expo 72, and yours truly was one of the people that went. I will never forget that week. As we learned every day, we'd have small groups and we would learn how to share our faith. We'd have Bible studies together. We'd pray together. And then we'd go out and blitz Dallas, Texas. Every shopping mall, every strip mall, every gas station. Our goal was to share Jesus with every person that we possibly could. It was an unforgettable summer that culminated, the end of that week culminated with a Jesus People concert where all the big Christian bands that were just getting started were there to have concerts every night, culminating with the last one with 200,000 young people there. Second chapter of Acts, Barry McGuire, Love Song, Randy Stonehill, Larry Norman, Andrea Crouch. It was a summer of Jesus music instead of the kind of music that rock and roll was producing, music that didn't have hope. I can guarantee you there wasn't a Christian artist that said, "I can't get no satisfaction." There was something else that happened in the summer right before that, also right at this time of the Jesus People movement. Right here in my area, Grantsburg, Wisconsin, 6 high school students went to Bible camp at Wood Lake Baptist Camp that's only about a mile from here. At that camp, they had an encounter with God, a special encounter with God. And they sat around the campfire the last night and they said, you know, what are we going to do? Our friends don't know Jesus. Our classmates don't know the Lord. And there's not youth ministry here. There's not youth pastors here. How are they going to find out about Jesus? And then as they looked around at each other, it dawned on them, well, maybe we could do something. So they started something they called Prayer and Share. And they just asked their moms and dads, hey, would it be okay if once every 6 weeks we'd open up our home and we could have our friends come and sit in the living room and we could have PS, Prayer and Share, with our friends at our house? And the parents said, yeah, that'd be fine. So they began in the fall of 1971 with just these 6 young people. But within a short time, they had anywhere from 50 to 75 high school students crammed into a living room as they did these few things. One, somebody would bring a guitar and they would sing some songs. Then Another one of the high school students would share a devotional about what God had been showing them that week in their personal life. Then they would have a time where they'd go around the circle and just share, hey, what would you like to share tonight that we can pray for? And young people would open up their hearts and their lives and share about what was going on in their home, temptations that they were facing, struggles that they had, and then they would take turns and pray for each other. And then when it was done, they'd hang out for a while, have some goodies, goof around a bit, and then head home. It would last from 6:30 to 8 o'clock every Monday night. Pretty soon, Minnesota found out what was going on in Grantsburg, and they started coming across the river, not for beer, but for Bible study. You see, back then, the drinking age in Minnesota was 21, but in Wisconsin, it was only 18, and we're just across the river. And so Pine City High School students started coming, and they began to meet Jesus, and pretty soon they started prayer and share over in Pine City. So as you can see, this is what happens when God shows up. It's not the 60s anymore. It's 2020. But you can see the similarities. Once again, we have a country full of division, hate, bitterness, disillusionment. We've lost hope. But in the story I shared with you tonight, a nation found out that when they were at the bottom, when they had tried everything they knew to try, God showed up and they met Jesus. Once again, I am hopeful that although the signs look bleak and dark, since the 60s, there has never been a better time for God to show up.